This morning I'm going to conclude the message series that I've been in pretty much for the month of August, and probably started it at the end of July. And we've been thinking about beyond the bumper sticker, where we've been looking at sayings, cliches that people, Christians, often say, and kind of drilling down into them and realizing that many of these cliches and many of these sayings, many of these bumper sticker type, what I'll call theology, really aren't true. And so we've been kind of bringing them in context, the truth of Scripture, to whatever that context, whatever that saying was, and hopefully gaining a better perspective and understanding from that. Well, this morning we're going to look at why it is that you and I need to have a faith that is beyond a bumper sticker. We're going to look at a passage of Scripture, 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14, 15, and 16, where the writer of 1 Peter talks to us then and today about the need for believers to give and the Greek word that he uses is apologia, a defense, a response, an answer for our faith. And so this morning, from 1 Peter chapter 3, and then we'll get into the text. It says, "But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear, do not be frightened." That's a quote from Isaiah chapter 8. But here we are. He says, "But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander." And so there is the context of the first century, that even Christians who were demonstrating virtuous lives, they were under siege. And folks in the first century were taunting them and teasing them and ridiculing them and belittling them. And so it is in that context then that the writer of 1 Peter talks about this need to give an answer, to give a defense, to give an apologia for the faith. Well, what I want to do with you real quick before we move into the substance of the text, I just want to say to you 4 things about cliche Christianity, because I think it's really important for the church to know this and to hear this, because we live in a culture that is spiritually starved. We just do. We live in a culture that is spiritually starved. And cliches will not feed that culture. Cliches will not feed us. And so if we think that our faith can just be boiled down to a bumper sticker or the front of a t-shirt, and that's going to meet the spiritually hungry need of our culture or even of ourselves, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. So I just want to say to you this morning that when we do that, when we live within a world of cliche, we cheapen the message. We cheapen the message. We show a lack of thought. You know, the gospel, and really the entire witness of the New Testament, calls us to be in a process of continually growing and maturing as believers. And when you and I are just throwing out cliches at folks, I just want to say to you, nobody's impressed by that, nobody's fed by that, and it shows a complete lack of thought. It's going to be really blunt. It trivializes truth. It trivializes truth. And it conveys, and all of us, myself included, it conveys a stagnant faith. If you are in bumper sticker Christianity, you're in neutral. The car is parked. It's not in drive mode. And so it's very important for us to understand that not only does much of this cliche Christianity and this bumper sticker theology, not only is it really not true when you kind of peel the onion, it shows that our faith is stagnated. We've stopped the growing and maturing process, and we're just stuck in neutral. So I just wanted to kind of just say that as pastor this morning, and I need to say this to myself as well, that is why it is so critical for you and I to move beyond the bumper sticker. To move beyond the bumper sticker. We are reminded of that in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 14, 15, and 16. The word that the writer uses is apologia, which means, and again, literally a defense. That when folks ask us about our faith, we ought to be prepared to give an apologia, a reason for our faith, a defense of our faith. It doesn't mean that we're giving a combative defense, but we have to know what it is and why it is that we believe. And so this morning I want to talk about what I think, for me anyway, are the 4 elements to having an apologia as believers that come directly from this passage in 1 Peter chapter 3. And so these are the 4 things that I would offer you as being the apologia that you and I need to have. The first is the providential who. The providential who. For you and I to have an apologia, for you and I to have a witness, we have to have a personal clarity about who Jesus was and is. If we do not have personal convictional clarity around who Jesus was and is, we don't have a witness. We don't have a witness. The writer of 1 Peter uses wonderful language here, meaningful language here, when he says, but in your hearts set apart. And the word set apart in the Greek is the same word for sanctified. It means that you set apart something, whatever it is that you're setting apart, because it is holy. And so when the writer of 1 Peter 3 says to set apart in your hearts, he is literally saying that you put as holy at the core of your being Christ as Lord. And these are 2 wonderful words that he uses to describe Jesus. Christ Christos, which literally means anointed one or Messiah. And so he's immediately connecting by that title, Jesus, to all of the Old Testament language and prophecy about the Messiah, that Christos, Jesus as Christos, is the fulfillment of all of that. Lord, Kairos, Kurios, is the Greek rendering of Jehovah, which means one who has power or authority over you and over me. And Jehovah also even goes a little further. It not only means one who has power and authority over you, but power and authority over you because there is a relationship. That's really the richness of that title, Jehovah. And so the writer of 1 Peter says, you and I are to set apart Christos, Kurios, at the core of our being. Jesus as anointed one, Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as Jehovah, one who has power and authority over us. And so we need to begin to understand that our apologia as believers begins with knowing what we believe about Jesus Christ. And again, if we don't have personal clarity around that, then we don't have a witness. We don't have a witness. And so the apologia begins with the providential who. Who is Jesus? What are your convictions about Christ? And then the personal why. The personal why. The writer of 1 Peter says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks, what, your pastor? No. Your mom? No. your spouse? No. He says, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you. You. And so we need to not only know what we believe, but we need to know why we believe it. We have to have the personal why. And I've often kind of reminded myself, and I remember a few years ago, I did a little message series on the church. And as I told the folks at the 845 service, I'm sure every one of you that was present for that message series remember everything, all the 3 points of those messages on the church. But one of the things that we were talking about at the church, when we were thinking about the church, is, you know what? Here we go. People are not interested in what you do at church. But that tends to be, when we talk about church, we talk about all the whatness of church. Well, we have a traditional service at 8:45. We have a contemporary service at 10:30. We have Sunday school at 9:30. We have a men's small group and a women's small group meets on weeknights down at the church at 7 o'clock. And you know, we end up giving them all the whatness of church. That's boring. The website can do that. The worship bulletin can do that. What people are really interested in knowing is, why do you go to church? What is it that you get out of church? Why do you go to a small group? Why do you go to a worship service? That is far more of a dynamic that they're interested in than the what. And so I want you to know the same is very much true when we think about the apologia that the writer of 1 Peter is talking about. Yes, it is critical that you and I know what we believe, but it is also critical that you and I know why we believe that when we are in conversation with another person. Why do you believe that Jesus Christ is Christos? Why do you believe that Jesus is Kurios? Why is Jesus Lord of your life? The personal why. And again, the writer of 1 Peter stresses quite clearly that you need to be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. This isn't about referring somebody to your grandmother. It's not about referring somebody, well, go talk to my wife. This isn't about referring to, well, you know, let me give you my pastor's number. This is the apologia that all believers, according to 1 Peter, are to have. And so we have the providential who, what it is that we believe, the personal why do we believe it, critical to our apologia. And then, thirdly, the pivotal when. The pivotal when. The writer of 1 Peter says that everyone who asks you, I'm going to talk about two pivotal whens in the text this morning. The pivotal when. Everyone who asks you, to be quite honest with you, you're probably, although this certainly could be within the realm of possibility, but you're probably not going to have somebody come up to you one day just out of the blue and say, you know what, I'd like for us to go out for coffee, and I just need for you to share the gospel with me. In all honesty, that probably is not going to happen. That may not be the way that they ask it, but I want you to know there are, again, I use this term quite a bit because I believe in it. There are these divine appointments, there are these pivotal wins, there are these points of entry in people's lives where they really, at the base of their question, are asking you what and why you believe. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean. I'll have folks, and I've had others, some of you in the congregation have shared with me, for example, a lady may say to you, you know what, my mom passed away about 6 months ago. And I've got a 6-year-old at home, and I don't know what to say to him about where grandmother is. That's an everyone who's asking you for the hope that you have. Are you with me? They haven't said, let's go have coffee, I want you to share the gospel with me, but it is a point of entry. It is a pivotal when for them. It is that divine appointment. That's what I mean. But they're asking a question. And they're wanting to know, albeit maybe indirectly, but they're wanting to know the what and the why of your apology. The other thing about the pivotal when in 1 Peter 3 is it is set in the context of Christians who are suffering. Christians are under siege here in the latter part of the first century. They're being maligned, again, they're being teased, they're being taunted, and that's why he says, don't feel bad. If you're doing everything right, you're doing everything virtuous, you're still getting made fun of, don't worry about it, just keep going, don't fear what they fear. I mean, that Christians are under siege here. They're under difficult circumstances. Can I kind of bring that into our context? I want to just say this to you. When you and I are in the difficult seasons of life, whatever they may be, eyes are upon you. Eyes are upon us. And people, again, thinking about the pivotal when, may say something to you like, with everything you've gone through, you just seem to have a calmness, a peace about you. That's a pivotal when. That's a divine appointment. That's an opportunity for you to share about the hope that you have within you. And so I want us to know that in those pivotal whens, bumper stickers don't work. Because cliches don't feed anybody. But a well-rounded, well-thought-out apologia has traction. Has traction. There was a statistic that I want to share with you this morning. It was a study done some years ago, and it asked believing, practicing Christians what prompted them to become a Christian. What kind of launched them on their walk of faith. 9% said a church service. 9%. So we need to be reminded that when we gather, this may be shocking to all of us, we're mostly Christians when we gather. 85% of those who responded said a person. Not a church service, a person. A friend. A family member. Now, this was not their language, but it's my language this morning, who shared with me their apology. Their what and their why. And that moved me into a journey and a relationship with Jesus Christ. But let me tell you what often happens. And I don't mean to, I'm not trying to make us all feel guilty or anything like that, but a lot of times when we are asked to give an apologia, let me give you 3 examples of what don't ever say this. Don't ever say this. Don't ever say, well, that's the way I was raised. That's not an apology. Why are you a Christian? Well, that's just the way I was raised. That's the way I was brought up. Ergo, if I had been raised a Buddhist, I'd be a Buddhist today. If I was raised a Muslim, I'd be a Muslim today. That's basically what you're saying. Well, that's just the way that's just the way I was taught. Now, we are blessed, those of us who had the privilege to grow up in a Christian home. I'm not diminishing that at all. But I'm saying the world in which we live needs to be Christians not by culture but by conviction. And there's a difference. An apologia is not saying to someone, well, that's just the way I was raised. An apologia is not if someone asks in those pivotal whens, well, I can't really explain it, I just am. That's not an apologia. But we have We have brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ who are walking around, and that's the best they can say. I would suggest to you, those responses are worse than a bumper sticker. Talk about having no thought. And so the writer here reminds us it is critical that we understand the providential who, that we understand who Jesus was and is, that we have the personal why. Why do we believe that? Why have we entrusted our lives to that? And the pivotal when, that we're prepared at any moment, on any day, with any person to offer that. To offer that. And then the writer of 1 Peter gives us what I think is the fourth element of apologia, and that is the polite how. He says when you're having these conversations, he says do it with gentleness, and the word there that he uses literally means a sweet reasonableness. Do it with respect. Have a reverence for the other person. Can I give you 3 L's this morning? Just not in your worship guide, but just 3 L's this morning about how we can live out that polite how that the writer is talking about. The 3 L's would be learn who the other person is. They've got a story, they've got a need, maybe they're going through a season or a struggle or an event in life that has brought down to that divine appointment that God has set up between you and them. Learn who they are. And that leads to the second L that will help you do that. Listen well. Listen well. I want to say to you, one of the things about witnessing and offering an apologia is that many times we listen more than what we say. Listen well to what they're asking, what they're really asking. And then third, leave that conversation on a positive note. Witnessing is not about winning an argument and losing a friend. Leave on a positive note, because here's the thing, if you leave that conversation on a positive note, the chances are greatly enhanced you're going to have another conversation with that person. The polite how. The polite how of apology. Let me close with a couple illustrations, because for me anyway, these are kind of help illustrate, how we can have an effective apologia. Again, knowing the providential who, the personal why, the pivotal when, the polite how. 4th century Roman emperor by the name of Julian was tired of Christianity. He was not one. But the movement was getting legs and it was making traction in the Roman Empire. And if you know anything about Roman history, you know that the pagan religion of the empire elevated the emperor to be God, to be godlike. And so it was the emperor's best interest to have as many pagans, just people like in the Roman Empire, as he could. So Christianity was not something that was early on befriended by the Roman emperors. And so there is a Roman historian, not a Christian historian, not a church historian, but a Roman historian who writes about Julian and writes about Julian bringing in all the priests from the pagan temples in and around Rome. And this is what Julian the emperor said to the priests on that day about Christians. He said, "Why then do we think that this is enough? Why do we not observe that it is there," meaning Christians, "benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and of course he's being insulted here, the pretended holiness of their lives that have done the most to increase atheism." Now that's what Julian called Christianity, atheism. "I believe that we ought really and truly to practice everything they're practicing. For it is disgraceful that, when no Jew ever has to beg, and the Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well, that all men see that our people lack aid from us." In other words, the Christians were so virtuous, so generous, so compassionate, so loving, that it was, as a collective witness, drawing people into the movement, and it upset the emperor no end. Now, I don't offer that illustration as a means of engaging in 3rd century history. I just simply offer it with this because it's going to lead to a question that we all need to think about. There was something about those Christians in Julian's day that made them stand out from everybody else that was around them, directly a result of their being a Christian. With that as